Last Tuesday, I watched my former mother-in-law being pushed through the designer handbag section of a department store in a wheelchair. Her head lolled to one side, drool pooling at the corner of her mouth. The man pushing her looked like he'd aged 30 years and 20. It was Robert, my ex-husband. They didn't see me at first. I was standing with my two daughters, Sarah on my left, Emily on my right. Sarah had just finished her shift at the hospital where she's an attending cardiac surgeon. Emily had driven in from downtown where she runs her own law firm. The girls were insisting on buying me a birthday gift, the way they do every year, making a whole production out of spoiling their mother. "Mom, you have to let us," Sarah was saying, holding up a designer bag I'd been eyeing. "It's your birthday." That's when Eleanor's wheelchair rolled right past us. I froze. Sarah noticed immediately. "Mom? What's wrong?" 20 years. It had been 20 years since I'd seen them. And good God, they looked like different people. Robert's hair had gone completely gray. What little was left of it. His shoulders hunched forward like he'd been carrying something impossibly heavy for too long. He was wearing a faded jacket I wouldn't have been caught dead in when we were married. But Eleanor was the real shock. The woman who'd once held court at every family gathering, who'd made my life a living hell for 15 years, who'd told me more times than I could count that I was worthless because I'd only given her granddaughter she was a shell. Wheelchair-bound, half paralyzed from what looked like a stroke, unable to even hold her own head up properly. Robert looked up and saw me. His eyes went wide. "Margaret." Emily stepped forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "I'm sorry. Do you know my mother?" Eleanor made some kind of noise, her mouth working around words that wouldn't form properly. It sounded like sorry, but I couldn't be sure. I took my daughter's hands. "Come on, girls. We're done here." "Wait," Robert called out. "Please, just shut him off." "I don't think so. Have a good day." We walked away. In the car, Emily asked, "Mom, was that your father and grandmother?" I said. "Yes." The girls exchanged a look. Sarah, always the caretaker, asked gently, "Are you okay?" And here's the thing, I was okay. Better than okay. I was absolutely fine. Because looking at them, seeing what their lives had become, I finally understood something I'd spent 20 years trying to believe. Karma doesn't always need your help. Sometimes you just need to live well and let the world balance itself out. But I should probably back up and tell you how we got here. I met Robert when I was 26. I was working as an office manager at a small import company, and he was a sales rep who worked in the same building. We dated for 6 months before he proposed. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed. But at 26, with my parents asking when I'd settle down, with all my friends getting married, I thought I'd found someone good. The first time I met Eleanor, his mother, she looked me up and down and said, "You're tall, good childbearing hips. You'll give me strong grandsons." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. We got married, got a little rental house in the suburbs. Within a year, I was pregnant with Sarah. When the ultrasound showed she was a girl, Eleanor's voice on the phone went flat. "Oh, well, you can try again." I remember thinking, try again? Sarah wasn't even born yet, and Eleanor was already writing her off. When Sarah was born, Eleanor came to the hospital exactly once. She looked at the baby for maybe 30 seconds and said, "She's pretty enough, I suppose. Next time, you'll have a boy." Robert said, "Mom, don't start." But it was too late. She'd started. When Sarah was 3, I got pregnant with Emily. This time, Eleanor was excited. She bought blue blankets. She picked out boys' names. She called me twice a week to tell me what foods I should eat to guarantee a son. The day we found out Emily was also a girl, Eleanor didn't come to our house for 6 weeks. At Emily's first birthday, Eleanor showed up empty-handed. When Sarah had turned 1, there'd been a party, presents, a cake from a fancy bakery. For Emily's first birthday, Eleanor brought nothing. She sat in our living room and said, I just don't see the point in making a fuss over another girl. That's when I should have known this wasn't going to get better. That's when I should have set boundaries, made Robert stand up to his mother, done something. But I was 31 with two small kids and a part-time job, and I convinced myself I could handle it. I could be the bigger person. I could prove to Eleanor that daughters were just as valuable as sons. Spoiler alert, you can't prove anything to someone who's already made up their mind. Robert started coming home later and later. He said business was picking up, he was making connections, building relationships. I believed him because I wanted to. When he suggested we start our own import business together, I jumped at the chance. My background was perfect for it. I'd been handling paperwork and logistics for years. Robert would handle sales. I'd handle operations. My mother can watch the girls, he said. It'll be good for everyone. Eleanor watching the girls. That should have been my second massive red flag. But she agreed to it, even acted excited about it, so I thought maybe she'd finally come around. Maybe spending time with her granddaughters would soften her. It didn't. She watched the girls, but she never played with them. Never read to them. Never did anything a grandmother should do. She parked them in front of the TV and called me at work every 2 hours to complain. They won't eat their vegetables. They're too loud. They're making messes. And always, if you'd had boys, this would be easier. Boys are calmer. Boys listen better. I bit my tongue and said thank you because I needed the childcare and we couldn't afford anything else. The business grew. Slowly at first, then faster. Within 5 years, we were pulling in real money. Within 10, we'd moved to a bigger house, hired 20 employees, were doing nearly $100 million in annual revenue. Robert's name was on the incorporation papers, but I was doing at least half the work. He negotiated contracts. I managed relationships with overseas suppliers. I handled all the paperwork that kept us in compliance with import regulations. When Robert went to business dinners and golf outings, I was back at the office making sure everything actually ran. But here's what I was also doing, even though I didn't realize it at the time. I was documenting everything. Every contract I negotiated had my signature. Every email chain had my name. Every supplier relationship had my handwriting all over it. I wasn't building evidence, I was just doing my job. But evidence is exactly what it became. At holiday dinners, Eleanor would talk about Robert's company like I didn't exist. She'd brag to her church friends about my son, the successful businessman, while I stood in her kitchen doing dishes. And every single holiday, without fail, she'd corner me at some point and say, "It's not too late, you know. You could still have a son." Sarah and Emily wouldn't mind having a little brother. By the time Sarah was 15 and Emily was 13, I was 43 years old and completely done with the idea of more children. Not that it mattered to Eleanor. "You're being selfish," she told me at Thanksgiving dinner, right in front of both girls. "Every family needs a son. How will Robert's legacy continue?" Sarah, God bless her, looked her grandmother right in the eye and said, "I'm going to be a doctor, Grandma." "What kind of legacy do you want?" Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "That's different. That was the last Thanksgiving we spent with Robert's family." I told him afterward that I was done subjecting our daughters to that kind of treatment. He said I was being too sensitive. He said his mother was old-fashioned, and I should make allowances. He said a lot of things that basically added up to, your feelings don't matter as much as keeping my mother happy. I should have left him then. But the business was in both our names, the girls were in high school, and I convinced myself I just needed to keep the peace a little longer. Then came the day that changed everything. Sarah was 16, getting ready for her SATs. Emily was 14, and dealing with typical teenage drama. Robert had been working late, 3 or 4 nights a week for months. I'd stopped asking where he was because every question turned into an argument. My car was in the shop, so I borrowed Robert's. I needed to pick up some paperwork from a client across town. When I got in, I adjusted the seat, and my foot kicked something under the passenger side. I reached down and pulled out an ultrasound photo. My hands started shaking before my brain even caught up. The ultrasound showed 20 weeks in the corner, and written in blue marker, "It's a boy." I sat in that car in our driveway for probably 20 minutes, just staring at this photo. My first thought wasn't even anger. It was almost funny in a horrible way. Of course. Of course he'd gotten someone else pregnant, and of course it was a boy. I took the ultrasound inside and tore the car apart looking for anything else. In the glove compartment, I found printed out text messages. I don't know why he'd printed them. Maybe he was sentimental, maybe he was just stupid, but there they were. "Your mom is so excited about the baby. She keeps talking about finally having a grandson. Eleanor wants us to name him Robert Jr. When are you going to tell Margaret? The baby's due in 4 months. Your mom." Eleanor knew. She'd known, and she'd been helping him hide it. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart breaking, that's too clean. It was more like something rotten finally splitting open. I drove to Eleanor's house. I walked in without knocking. I still had a key from all those years of dropping off the girls. She was in her living room, and sitting across from her was a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, early 30s, with a very obvious baby bump. They both jumped when they saw me. "Margaret," Eleanor said, trying to recover. "What are you doing here?" I held up the ultrasound. "I found this in Robert's car. Would either of you like to explain?" The blonde woman started crying immediately. Eleanor just looked at me with this cold, calculating expression I'd seen 100 times before. "You need to calm down," Eleanor said. I laughed. I actually laughed. "Calm down? You've known about this. You've been helping him." "What was I supposed to do?" Eleanor snapped. "You wouldn't give him a son. Someone had to." There it was. 15 years of subtext, finally said out loud. I hadn't given her a son, so I deserved to be replaced. I looked at the blonde woman. "What's your name?" "See, Crystal," she stammered. "Crystal, has Robert told you he's going to leave me and marry you?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He's lying. He's not going to leave me because if he does, he loses half the business. The business that I built with him, that I've been running while he's been screwing you." I turned to Eleanor. "And you? You think you're finally getting your grandson? Enjoy him. Because you're never seeing my daughters again. Not at holidays. Not at graduations. Not at their weddings. You wanted a grandson so badly? He's all you get." I walked out and drove straight to my friend Jennifer's house. Jennifer's a CPA, and I trusted her with my life. I told her everything. She made coffee, and we sat at her kitchen table while I ugly cried for probably an hour. Then she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go home, act normal, and start copying every single business document you can get your hands on. Bank statements, contracts, supplier agreements, everything. We're going to prove your contribution to that company, and we're going to make sure you get every penny you're owed." Over the next 3 months, I became an expert in being duplicitous. I smiled at Robert over breakfast. I asked about his day. I acted like I didn't know anything. And the whole time I was building a case. Every document got copied and sent to Jennifer. Every text message got screenshotted. I even recorded a few phone conversations where Robert talked to Crystal about minimizing the divorce settlement. The night Crystal gave birth, Robert came home at 3 a.m. I was waiting in the living room. "We need to talk," I said. He knew. The look on his face told me he knew I knew. "Margaret, I can explain." "Don't. I don't want your explanations. I want a divorce." He tried to play it calm. "Okay. We can work something out. The house can be yours, and we'll figure out child support. And 45% of the company." His face went white. "What?" "I built that business with you. I have documentation going back 10 years proving my contribution. Contract negotiations with my signature. Supplier relationships I cultivated. Employee testimonial. I've already filed for divorce. and included a complete accounting of my business contributions. You can't. I can. And I did. You committed adultery, Robert. That matters in this state. I have evidence, text messages, photos, witness statements. Your girlfriend's pregnancy is pretty good proof all by itself. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to agree to my terms, or I'm going to drag you and your mother through court and make sure everyone in your business network knows exactly what kind of man you are. He tried to negotiate. He tried to guilt me. Think about the girls. He tried to get his mother involved. She called me 17 times that week. I didn't answer once. My lawyer was a woman named Patricia Chen, and she was spectacular. She laid out my case like she was giving a TED Talk. Robert's lawyer kept trying to minimize my business contributions. Patricia would pull out another document, another contract, another email chain. When Robert's lawyer suggested I'd just been doing secretarial work, Patricia actually laughed. My client negotiated contracts worth $80 million over the past 5 years, Patricia said. She personally managed relationships with suppliers in 7 countries. She handled all import compliance documentation. The business would have collapsed without her. And we have testimonials from employees stating that Mrs. Anderson effectively ran the company while Mr. Anderson played golf. The judge looked at Robert. Is this accurate? Robert couldn't even deny it. We had too much proof. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. I got the house, 45% of the business, $200,000 in alimony, and $2,000 a month in child support until the girls turned 18. Robert got to keep his precious son and his mother's approval. Sarah was 17 when the divorce was finalized. Emily was 15. I sat them down and explained everything. I didn't badmouth their father. I didn't have to. They'd seen enough over the years to connect the dots themselves. We're better off without them, Sarah said simply. And she was right. The next 10 years were hard in the way that building anything worthwhile is hard. I poured myself into work. I poured myself into raising my girls. Sarah got into medical school at a prestigious university. Emily got into a top law school. I went to every graduation, every white coat ceremony, every achievement. I was there, always, because nobody was going to make my daughters feel like they weren't enough. Robert, meanwhile, married Crystal. Eleanor moved in with them to help with the baby. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the precious grandson they did, name him Robert Jr., by the way, was a nightmare. Tantrums, behavioral problems, couldn't keep friends. Eleanor's health started declining, but she'd burned bridges with her other children by favoring Robert so much that nobody wanted to help her. The business struggled without me. Robert tried to handle operations himself and nearly ran it into the ground. He had to sell his shares within 5 years. My 45%, meanwhile, had grown in value because I'd actually kept my portion of the business running and profitable. I eventually bought out the remaining shareholders and became sole owner. Sarah finished her residency and became a cardiac surgeon. Emily passed the bar on her first try and joined a prestigious firm before leaving to start her own practice. They both got married, Sarah to another doctor, Emily to a wonderful man she met in law school. I have 4 grandchildren now. 2 boys, 2 girls. I love them all exactly the same. Which brings us back to Tuesday, to the department store, to seeing Eleanor in a wheelchair and Robert looking like he'd aged 100 years. I heard the rest of the story later from Emily, who made some discreet inquiries through her legal network. Robert Jr. had dropped out of community college, gotten arrested twice, once for DUI, once for assault, and was currently unemployed and living in Robert's basement. Crystal had divorced Robert 6 years ago when the money ran out and immediately remarried. Eleanor had a stroke 3 years ago and required full-time care. Robert Jr. refused to help, so Robert became his mother's caretaker while working as a home health aide to make ends meet. The precious grandson Eleanor had wanted so badly couldn't even be bothered to visit her. My daughters, the ones she dismissed as worthless, had become successful, compassionate, accomplished women. They call me every week. They bring my grandchildren to visit. They built lives that make me proud every single day. I'm not going to lie and say I don't think about it sometimes. I think about all those years of Eleanor telling me I wasn't good enough. I think about Robert deciding I was disposable. I think about how close I came to believing them. But then I look at Sarah and Emily and I know the truth. I won. Not because Robert and Eleanor ended up miserable, though there's a certain poetic justice in that. I won because I raised two extraordinary human beings who know their worth. Because I built a successful business on my own terms. Because I didn't let anyone else's limitations define what I was capable of. Last night, Sarah called me. Mom, you okay? After seeing them yesterday? I'm fine, sweetie. Really? Good. Because Emily and I were thinking we want to take you on a trip for your birthday. Somewhere warm. Just the three of us. See, that's what Eleanor never understood. She thought having a son would guarantee her security and love. But love doesn't come from chromosomes. It comes from showing up, from being present, from valuing people for who they are, not what gender they happen to be born. Eleanor got her grandson. I got my daughters. I know who really won. If you've ever been told you weren't enough because of something you couldn't control, your gender, your age, your circumstances, I want you to hear this. They were wrong. You are enough. More than enough. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well, loving fiercely, and letting the people who underestimated you watch you thrive. Here on the porch, I see so many of you sharing stories about in-laws who made you feel small, or partners who didn't see your worth. I read every comment, and I want you to know, you're not alone in this. Have you ever had to fight for recognition in your own family? I'd love to hear how you found your way through.